Hello guys, in this video I'm gonna show a tutorial for a simple character controller in a 2D game. And firstly you will have to start with adding a sprite. I'll just take a square and I'm just gonna give it a green color simply, and this is going to be our player, which I'll just name it player and start with putting the tag as player. Then for the character controller I'm gonna create a script called player controller, create a new script, player controller, create and edit. This script is gonna require a rigid body 2D, rigid body 2D and a collider. I'm just gonna add the box collider 2D also. Then we set the freeze rotation on the Z axis so it doesn't spin around the player if it hits a wall while we're moving. Then what we need to do is go inside the player controller script and create the variables for moving the player. This is the speed variable, the jump force value, and the boolean for if we are jumping a rigid body 2D to get from the player, and also the player's collider so we can check the collider's properties. Then we create string variables to hold the input axis so you can change them depending on what kind of axis you would like to access the player's movement. Then we are getting the rigid body and the collider that's connected to the player in the start function, so when we start the game we have access to them. Now we just need a method for moving the character, which is going to be the private void move, which takes the rigid body at a velocity, which is going to be a new vector with the direction we want to go in, the speed we want to go in, and then adding the y coordinate, which is going to be our rigid body's velocity downwards. So it's going to be rigid body.velocity.y. Now I need to create a variable for the direction, which is going to be a float. And then in the update function, we're going to set the direction to be equals our input axis, which is our horizontal input. And then after that, we are going to call the move function. So every time we press the horizontal keys, we are going to move left or right. Now we are ready to test the movement we have inputted. And if you haven't set up any additional horizontal input, then your basic horizontal and vertical inputs should be the arrow keys or WASD. So you should be able to move the character left and right using one of those, as you can see here, and the gravity is connected to it. And now we should just implement the jumping function. I create a private void called jump, and then from the update function I call the jump method, and then we create an if statement checking or input.getButtonDown of our jump input, and then also if we are jumping. If we are not jumping, then we should be adding a force to a rigid body, which is a new vector where we are not moving at the horizontal axis but at the vertical axis with the jump force. And the mode should be a force mode 2D impulse, which gives an impulse moving the character upwards. And then we are setting is jumping to be true, so we are sure now we are jumping. Now if we test the game, you can see we are able to jump once but not again when we hit the ground, and this is because we are not checking if we are hitting the ground and then thereby setting the is jumping variable back to be false, because we are not jumping anymore and we are not floating in the air, which is something we should be doing now. Let's write the private void check ground method, and then before we implement the logic in it, let's set up some variables we're gonna use, which is gonna be a float called wall sliding speed, another float called wall ray length, and then let's also serialize some of these fields so we can access them from the inspector. That's just so they're still private but we're able to see them instead of just making everything public. And after we have done that, let's put some more methods in, which not methods, variables, another private float called ground check ray length, which is going to be the length from the player down to the ground to see if we are hitting the ground. And then let's also create a layer mask for the wall layer, which we are going to be using for the wall slide we are going to be implementing afterwards also. And a boolean called wall sliding to check if we are sliding or not. Then we are going to create a private bool method called isGrounded. And in this we are going to cast a raycast. So we first have to create a raycast hit2d, which we are going to call ground check. And this is going to be equal a physics.2d.raycast, which takes in the transform position of our object and shoots a ray downwards by the vector 2.down, which is going to be the length of ground check ray length. And we are seeing if the object we are trying to collide with is the wall layer. And then we are going to return that as a ground check that collider is not equals null. So if there is a collider under us, we are grounded. We're going to check this in the method private void check ground. And if we're grounded, then isJumping is equals false, and we're able to jump again. We're then going to call this method in the void update function. Then in the inspector for the player, remember to set the ground check ray length. I set it at 0.6 because my player is 1 unit big. So it's starting from the middle and going down. And remember to also set the wall layer, which I have set as the wall, which is something you'll have to create by yourself, a layer mask. I will show it in the end what I have set my tile set as. Because of the ray length, we are getting checked each frame. We are able to double jump, which is something I don't find desirable. So I'm going to now show a way of negating the double jump. To stop the double jumping, we are going to create a float called last jumped, which we're going to set to 0. And then a float called jump delay, which are going to be set to 0.2. And then we are going to now create the wall sliding method. In the wall sliding method, we are going to create a vector2 called box size, which is going to be equals a new vector2 with the x diameters being 0.1 and the y being the player collider.bounds.size.y, so the size of the player collider. And then we are going to raycast hit2d wall check hit, which is going to be a physics 2d box cast, which takes the transform position and the box size. Then we set the rotation to be 0 because we just want it to go left or right. Then we are going to create a new vector2 with the direction which we want the box to go in, and then the length out from the position, which is going to be the wall ray length. Then we create a wall layer to check where it is, and then if we have a collider on the wall and it's not equals to null, then wall sliding equals to true, else wall sliding is false. And if wall sliding is true, then we are adding a velocity to the rigid body, which is equal to a new vector with the x being the same velocity the rigid body has now, and the y velocity is going to be the negative wall sliding speed. Then in the check ground function, we set the if statements to be also including time.time minus the last jump, and that needs to be bigger than the jump delay. If it is jumping is then true, and we're setting last time jumped back to 0, then in the jump method we are setting last jumped equals time.time. Then remember to call the wall sliding method in the void update function, so that it's called each frame and we are checking if we can wall slide or not. Then I just moved the main camera inside the player, so it's following the player around. This is not the best way to do it, but it works just for showcasing you guys. And then remember in the inspector to also set the wall sliding speed. I set mine to 2, you can set it to whatever. And then also the wall ray length, and set this depending on how big your character is. I set mine to 0.6. and how the player should be able to move around and slide down the walls if you're pressing one of the keys in and simulating the player trying to hold on, and if you let go, it's just falling with the normal gravity. So yes, that's a basic 2D character controller. Hope you liked it, and please subscribe. I'm using a grid with a base tile set on it, and I have set that to have the ground tag and also have the layer type to be wall, which I've made custom to it, which is what is being checked by the rays cast out. Just remember to set your ground and your walls to the same if you have them as separate objects or as the same object. This script should be working just fine for your game.